The HOA tried to steal my farm. They forgot who controls their water. When I discovered that my HOA had secretly sold 1,700 acres of my family's farmland, I knew I had to fight back. But instead of just going to court, I decided to remind them of one crucial I control their water supply. The HOA's first move the morning was perfect for planting clear skies and a light breeze. I was on my tractor before sunrise, just like my grandfather had taught me. That's when my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. When I finally checked my messages, I nearly choked on my sandwich. 10 missed calls from neighbors, 3 voicemails from my cousin, and 1 email from the HOA violation notice. I opened it. They claimed my tractor noise violated their peaceful enjoyment and that my chicken coops created offensive odors that affected property values. They gave me 48 hours to shut down all farming operations or face a $200 per day fine. I laughed out loud, but they had no authority over my land. The HOA president showed up the next morning. I was greeted by the sound of a car door slamming. A woman in a crisp white pantsuit marched across my front yard, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 HOA board members. Ms. Walker? She called. I'm Deborah Williams, president of Oak Ridge Estates. HOA. We need to discuss your violations. I crossed my arms. There's nothing to discuss. Your HOA has no jurisdiction over my land. Deborah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Actually, according to the county zoning board, your agricultural exemption expired last year. That means your land is now subject to HOA regulations. That caught me off guard. My property tax bills hadn't changed. My family has farmed this land for over 100 years, I said. No HOA can suddenly claim authority over it. Her smile turned cold. Times change, Ms. Walker. We have standards now. She handed me a cease and desist order. Then they walked away. But I wasn't about to back down. Something was off. I called my cousin Tom, who lived in Oak Ridge Estates and served on the town council. They've been planning this for months, he warned. Deborah's been having private meetings with developers. She's changing meeting minutes after they're approved. That night, I did some digging through county records, and that's when I found it. My agricultural exemption was still valid for another 5 years. Deborah had lied. For the next week, I ignored their letters and fines. Then came the noise complaints to the sheriff. Mike, look, said Sheriff Davis, an old high school friend. I knew this was ridiculous, but they were filing complaints every single day. They had even started a petition to classify my farm as a public nuisance. Dave, I said, my family has been feeding this county for generations. What's really going on? He hesitated. I shouldn't tell you this, but the HOA is pushing for a massive development project, and it involves your land. That's when I saw them. Strangers in suits, walking my eastern fields, taking pictures and measurements. I jumped in my truck and drove straight toward them. The shocking discovery, can I help you? I called out. You're trespassing. A tall man in a designer suit turned. I'm James Miller with Westview Development Corporation. We're surveying the land for planning purposes. I frowned. Planning for what? This is my farm. Miller looked confused. According to our paperwork, Westview purchased 1,700 acres from Oak Ridge Estates 3 weeks ago. Construction begins next month. My heart stopped. That's impossible. I never sold my land. He showed me official documents, survey maps with county stamps, and a signature that looked exactly like mine. But I never signed anything. I raced home and pulled out my property deeds from a safe. Everything looked fine, but something wasn't right. I called the county recorder's office. Sir, there's an ownership division filing from 6 weeks ago, the clerk said. According to our records, 1,700 acres were transferred to Oak Ridge Estates Community Trust. You only own 300 acres now. My hand shook. That's impossible. I never signed any transfer. Sir, the documents have your signature. Do you want me to email you copies? When I opened the file, I stared at my own forged signature. That's when I saw her. Deborah, sitting in her luxury SUV parked at the edge of my property, watching me. When she saw me looking, she smiled and waved. I had less than a month before the bulldozers arrived. And that's when I remembered one very important thing. Who controls their water supply? The water rights play. My grandfather had signed an agreement in 1943 allowing the county to build a reservoir on our land. At the time, it seemed like a good deal. The government needed a reservoir to supply nearby communities, and my grandfather, a practical man, saw an opportunity. In exchange, he ensured that our family would have full control over the distribution of water from the reservoir. Not a single drop could be diverted without our authorization, and any changes would require our signature. That little detail was ignored by the real estate developers and the homeowners association when they forged my signature and stole my land. I tried to fight back, took it to court, gathered evidence, but the battle had been decided before it even began. My lawyer told me the process could take years, and even with proof of forgery, I was up against multi-billion-dollar corporations and corrupt politicians. In the end, everything got bogged down in bureaucracy, and before I could stop it, the developers had already begun preparing the land for construction. I had no choice. I lost my farm. The machines came. They tore down the barns, ripped out the fences, leveled the fields my family had farmed for generations. The place where I grew up, where I learned to drive a tractor with my grandfather, became a massive construction site, full of cranes and cement trucks. I watched it all without reacting. I didn't protest, didn't throw myself in front of bulldozers, didn't make speeches about corporate greed. I just waited. I waited for years. The project moved forward. The land that once fed the region became one of the largest real estate developments in the state. Luxury condominiums, shopping centers, office buildings, private parks. They wanted to turn my family's old farm into an urban paradise, a symbol of modernity and prosperity. Investors poured millions into the project. Politicians went on TV, talking about the new city within a city. The real estate market was booming. The construction companies rushed to erect skyscrapers and high-end housing for future buyers. And me? I kept waiting. Every building that went up, every newly paved street, every artificial park built, all of it strengthened my plan. The developers, the politicians, the investors, they all thought they had won. They thought they had beaten me, erased me, built over my history. But there was one thing none of them realized. They built relying on my water. All those thousands of homes, the luxury condos, the shopping centers, the restaurants, the private clubs, everything depended on the reservoir built on my old farm. And that reservoir still belonged to me. The agreement my grandfather signed was never revoked. When they stole my land, they only took the soil but not the water rights. And none of these developers had bothered to check that little detail. The buyers were excited. Pre-sales for the units began. Real estate agents displayed impressive models, promising a perfect, modern, sustainable city. TV commercials advertised it as the next hub of innovation and growth, a place where families could thrive. And that was exactly when I struck. The city was almost complete, but the houses still hadn't been sold. No one had moved in. No investors had gotten their money back. They were just about to close their first million-dollar deals, but they had no idea they were sitting on a ticking time bomb. One night, with all the contracts signed and the developments ready to open, I sent my official statement. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Mega development in crisis. Water supply compromised. New urban project built illegally on private water source. Investors warned. Without a deal, the new neighborhood could become a ghost town. At the construction company's offices, chaos broke out. The phones wouldn't stop ringing. Lawyers frantically combed through contracts. Executives sweated as they watched thousands of buyers cancel their reservations. And then, as I had expected, they called me for a meeting. This time, it wasn't just Deborah. Everyone was there. The heads of the construction firms, attorneys, investors, even the mayor. All of them sitting at the table, looking at me like I was the devil himself. A man in a tailored suit adjusted his tie and tried to stay calm. "We can resolve this amicably. How much do you want to release the supply?" I crossed my arms. "I don't want money." The hint of relief some of them tried to show immediately vanished. "Then what do you want?" Another asked. I smiled slowly, letting them stew in their own panic for a moment before answering. "I want everything back." Deborah, sitting in the corner, couldn't contain herself. "This is absurd. You're bluffing. The government won't let a single man sabotage a project of this scale." I tilted my head slightly, remaining calm. "Try me. But remember, you have beautiful buildings, luxury condos, parks, and shopping malls, but not a single drop of water." Some of the executives exchanged terrified glances. One of the lawyers tried to intervene. "Perhaps we can renegotiate some conditions." But Deborah snapped at him, furious. "Shut up." I chuckled. "You have 48 hours to cancel the land sale and return everything to my name. After that, I start talking to the press and my lawyers." The meeting ended with no agreement, but I already knew I had won. In the following days, the media continued exposing the scandal. Investors pulled their money out. The construction companies went into crisis mode. Lawyers scrambled to find a legal way out, but there was nothing they could do without playing by my rules. Now, it was just a matter of waiting a little longer. I knew that soon, they would come back to me with a proposal they would have no choice but to accept. And when that happened, I would take back what was mine all along. I sat at the head of the conference table, watching the tense faces of the executives, lawyers, and investors. They were desperate. Some drummed their fingers on the table. Others frantically checked their phones, searching for a miracle escape from the disaster they were facing. But they all knew the truth. There was no solution without my approval. The silence stretched for long seconds until one of the suited men finally spoke. "We can resolve this amicably. What are your demands to restore the water supply?" I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. "I want everything back. My farm, my land, every inch you stole from me. I want it all back in my name." The reaction was immediate. Murmurs, whispers, incredulous stares. And then Deborah, who had been silent until now, exploded. "That's impossible. You lost this land legally. It was bought and sold according to the law. You'll never get it back." I crossed my arms and stared directly at her. "Legally? You really want to use that word? Because last I checked, my signature was forged." Silence returned, but this time it was heavy and suffocating. No one could deny what I was saying. Before anyone could respond, my lawyer, a sharp-eyed man with graying hair, cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Mike, I need to speak with you. Privately. Now." I raised an eyebrow, annoyed at the interruption, but I nodded and followed him to a quiet corner of the room. As soon as the door closed behind us, he fixed me with a serious look. "You're making a mistake. If you insist on taking back the land, you could lose everything." Rage flared up instantly. "What? How can you say that? You know this land is mine. We have the proof." He sighed, crossing his arms. "Yes, we have proof. But that doesn't mean the fight will be easy. These corporations have the best lawyers in the country, political influence, and they'll drag this case through the courts for decades if they have to. Even if we prove the forgery, reclaiming the land will be an endless battle." I felt my fist clench. I had waited years for this moment. I wasn't about to let it slip away. "Then what do you suggest?" I growled. He studied me for a moment, then smirked slightly. "Instead of trying to take everything back, make them pay you to stay." I frowned. "What the hell do you mean?" "You now have something you never had before, Mike: visibility. The public is watching this case. Investors are nervous. Politicians are panicking. For the first time, you have real power. Use it." I still didn't fully understand. He took a deep breath and continued. "Prove, beyond doubt, that your signature was forged. Make it a legally undeniable fact. If you do that, no one can argue that this land belongs to you. But instead of trying to take it back, turn it into your greatest investment. These companies have poured billions into this development. They can't just abandon it. If you charge them a lifetime lease for the land they stole, you'll become a multimillionaire. You don't need to own the buildings. You just need to make sure they always have to pay to use your land." I stared at him, feeling a mix of anger and fascination. "You want me to rent out my own land to the same people who stole it from me?" He smiled. "I want you to get richer than you ever imagined without lifting a finger. And once you do, they'll never be able to take anything from you again." The thought unsettled me. A part of me wanted revenge. I wanted to see this place burn, to see these companies go bankrupt, to see Deborah and the speculators lose everything. But another part knew my lawyer was right. If I demanded the land back, they would fight tooth and nail. But if I forced them to pay to stay, they'd have no choice but to comply. In the end, which victory would be sweeter? I returned to the conference room, still processing everything. Everyone's eyes were on me, waiting for my decision. I took a deep breath and sat down, meeting each of their gazes. "First things first, I want you all to know that I've already proven my signature was forged. If I take this to a judge, this case will drag out for years and your entire project will be shut down." I saw their faces tighten, but I'm not unreasonable. I know many families have invested here. I know billions have been poured into these buildings. So, I have a proposal. I clasped my hands together and smiled. "I don't want your companies. I don't want your buildings. I want my name on the deed to this land, and I want a lifetime lease agreement. Every square foot of this place will officially be mine, and you'll pay to keep using what you stole. Every month, without exception, forever." The reaction was instant. One of the older investors slammed his fist on the table. "This is outright extortion." I tilted my head. "Oh, so now you care about theft? How interesting." Another lawyer tried to negotiate. "We can't agree to a lifetime lease. We can offer a lump sum settlement to resolve this permanently." I shook my head. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you. If you refuse, by tomorrow morning, this case will be in court and your entire project will be ruled illegal. You all lose." Dead silence. Deborah was pale. She knew I had won. The lawyers whispered among themselves. The investors frantically checked their phones. I just waited. I knew they were trapped. Finally, One of the directors took a deep breath and spoke. "We need time to discuss this internally." I shrugged. "You have 24 hours. I stood up and walked out of the room, feeling the weight of victory settle on my shoulders. The game wasn't over yet, but I knew I had them cornered. They could argue, try to find loopholes, but in the end, they knew they had no escape. And when they came back with an answer, I would be waiting, ready to ensure that they paid for the rest of their lives for what they did. But something still nagged at me. Deborah. She had been too quiet, and I knew someone like her wouldn't go down without a fight. The following days were a game of patience. I knew they were desperate, but I also knew they would try anything to escape the trap they had fallen into. They needed to maintain appearances, pretend they still had some leverage, some hidden ace up their sleeve. But it was obvious to everyone that time was against them. As I waited for their final response, the media continued to exploit the scandal. Newspapers, TV channels, and investigative blogs dissected every detail of the case, from the forged signature to the corrupt maneuvers that had allowed them to steal my land. Experts debated whether the project could survive such a disaster, while economists warned that the financial collapse of the development was imminent if they didn't find an immediate solution. Then, after 24 hours of closed-door meetings, I received the call I had been expecting. "We accept the terms," one of the investor's lawyers said. His voice was tense, as if every word was cutting into his dignity. "Good," I replied calmly. "We'll sign the contracts tomorrow." The next day, I walked into the conference room of one of the city's most luxurious office buildings. Everyone was there, executives from major corporations, top-tier lawyers, investors looking like they had swallowed something bitter, and, of course, Deborah. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with hate. She knew I had won, but she still couldn't accept it. The documents were already prepared. I reviewed them with my lawyer. Everything was there. The lifetime lease contract, the official recognition that the land was mine, and the terms for the water supply. "Just one more thing," I said as I read through the final clauses. "You'll also be paying for the water you use." A heavy silence filled the room. One of the lawyers frowned. "But you're already charging rent for the land. Isn't that enough?" I smiled and shut the folder with the contracts. "You all knew perfectly well that this entire place depends on the reservoir's water. My grandfather signed a contract that gives my family complete control over its distribution. If you want to stay here, you'll pay for it too." The discomfort in the room was palpable. They couldn't refuse. They had no choice. Deborah clenched her teeth, her fists pressing against the table. "You're extorting us." I tilted my head, amused. "No, I'm just charging for what's mine. Unlike you, I don't need to forge documents to do it." They knew they had lost. The agreement was signed right then and there, and before I left, I shook hands with some of the investors who, despite their frustration, were trying to maintain their composure. Deborah, however, did not meet my eyes even once. The next day, I restored the water supply, but now under contract. Every drop that flowed into that development's pipelines made me a fortune. The project was saved, buyers came back, and the money flow skyrocketed. The first few months were just the beginning. My name was on every contract, every transaction involving that land had to go through me. The companies that had built there couldn't operate without paying me rent and for the water supply. It was like an eternal toll, a tribute ensuring that every month millions flowed into my bank account. And then, finally, came the moment to prove the forged signature in court. With the scandal still fresh in the public's memory, taking the case to trial was easy. We had all the evidence, comparative documents, forensic analysis of the signatures, testimonies from notary office employees who confirmed they had never seen me sign anything in person. The judge didn't take long to issue a verdict. The signature was fake, and the land transfer had been illegal. That should have meant I could reclaim my land entirely and kick everyone out. But at that point, it wasn't even worth it anymore. By then, I was making more money than anyone in that room could ever imagine. Every month, millions were pouring into my account without me having to lift a single finger. If I took the land back, I'd have to manage everything, rebuild the infrastructure, and face new legal battles. But as things stood, I owned the ground under their feet, and they had no choice but to keep paying me. So instead of kicking them out, I raised the rent even higher. The court ruling gave me even more leverage in negotiations. Now that my legal ownership was official, I could renegotiate the contracts however I wanted. Some companies tried to protest, claiming the new terms were unfair. My lawyer simply smiled and replied, "If you don't want to pay, feel free to demolish everything and leave." No one left. Now, I was a multi-millionaire without lifting a finger. But I didn't stop there. With the absurd profits I was making, I diversified my investments. I bought land in other regions, moved into real estate, funded modern agricultural projects. I went from being a farmer who had lost everything to a real estate and infrastructure mogul. The irony? The same investors who once laughed at me were now trying to partner with me for new business deals. And what about Deborah? Her career was completely ruined. With the forged signature exposed, her name was permanently stained. It was discovered that she had not only forged my signature, but also altered meeting records to approve projects without public consultation. She was sued, lost all influence, and the investors discarded her without hesitation. But I knew she wasn't going to give up so easily. And I was right. Even after losing everything, after being removed from the project's board, she still tried to claw her way back. Through a few contacts, I learned that she was gathering a new group of investors to try and overturn my contracts. I knew she would attempt some dirty move, maybe even a new legal trick to try and free herself from the lifelong payments. But this time, I was ready for anything. Now, she was the one on the defensive, and I couldn't wait to see what her next move would be. It took years of battle. The day I signed that lifetime lease agreement was the beginning of my empire, but the war was far from over. What followed was a long game of patience, a silent war where, for the first time, I was in control. For years, the former homeowners association, the investors, and the politicians who had tried to crush me had to accept the new reality. I owned the land, and there was nothing they could do to change that. The first years were the toughest. Even though they had signed the contracts, they tried everything, looking for legal loopholes, attempting to renegotiate, even trying to intimidate me. They sued me repeatedly, but every case collapsed as soon as judges examined the documents. The law was on my side, and now, so was the power. The contracts were airtight, and every single building in that massive development owed me money, month after month without exception. It didn't matter if the economy tanked, if the real estate market crashed, if investors pulled out, they still had to pay me to keep their businesses running. That's how I built my family's fortune. Over time, the money from that land stopped being just a steady income and became a financial empire. I expanded my investments, bought more land, acquired companies, launched my own real estate ventures. We moved into technology, modern agriculture, and even urban infrastructure. Before long, the same investors who once tried to ruin me were now coming to me for funding for their projects. But what happened to those who tried to steal from me? The old homeowners association ceased to exist. The signature forgery scandal destroyed its reputation, and over time, the very same residents turned against those who had scammed them. They realized that they had been deceived just as much as I had. The money collected from fees and sales never benefited anyone except the speculators and corrupt officials who had been pulling the strings. The association's name became a joke, a symbol of failure and corruption. And the investors? Some accepted their losses and moved on, paying their rent each month without protest. Others tried to escape, to sell their developments, but no one wanted to buy properties locked into a permanent lease agreement. Some went bankrupt. Others simply resigned themselves to the fact that no matter what they did, I would always be making money at their expense. And Deborah? She was by far the one who fought the hardest to survive. Even after being exposed as the mastermind behind the fraud, she refused to disappear. She tried to break into new industries, sought out investors, even attempted to start her own real estate consulting firm. But no one trusted her. No serious investor wanted her name attached to a project. The scam she tried to pull on me ruined her reputation forever. At first, she struggled to stay relevant, showing up at industry events, pretending she still had influence. But as the years passed, fewer and fewer people wanted to do business with her. Her name became synonymous with fraud and financial disaster. Eventually, Deborah vanished from the spotlight. Today, I know that her life is nothing like she had envisioned for herself. She didn't go completely broke, but she's nowhere near the power she once had. She never ran another major development, never regained her influence, never commanded anything significant again. The last I heard, she had moved to a small town, tried to rebuild her life away from the scandals. No matter where she is now, she knows she lost. And me? My life changed forever. I went from being a farmer who almost lost everything to one of the most powerful investors in the region. My family now has a legacy that can never be erased. Everything we built came from what they had tried to steal, and in the end, we were the ones who emerged victorious. Today, my family owns an empire. My children and grandchildren will never have to fight the way I did, but they will always remember where it all started. They grew up knowing that everything we have today didn't come from luck or inheritance, but from years of battle to reclaim what was rightfully ours. And the best part? I never had to destroy anyone. They destroyed themselves. Those who try to crush me now have nothing, while I have everything that was mine by right and so much more. This was my revenge, and I enjoy it every single day.